Bardi Castle, perched high upon a rugged hilltop in the Italian region of Emilia-Romagna, has always been a place of mystery and dread. For centuries, the locals have whispered about the strange occurrences and restless spirits that seem to haunt the ancient walls of the castle. Overlooking the small, sleepy town of Bardi, this ominous fortress, with its crumbling stone walls and shadowy towers, stands as a silent sentinel over the land, a constant reminder of the violent past that still lingers within its darkened halls. As one approaches the castle, the first thing that strikes you is its imposing presence. The winds that howl through the surrounding woods seem to carry an eerie hum, as if the very air around the castle is charged with an unseen force. The castle is surrounded by a dense, almost suffocating forest, and the closer you get, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes. The trees seem to whisper to each other in the wind, their branches reaching out, as if trying to keep intruders at bay. The history of Bardi Castle is shrouded in dark legend, and the deeper you delve into the stories of this place, the more disturbing they become. It is said that the castle was built on the foundations of an older structure, one that dates back to ancient times. The original castle was built by the Romans, but it was the medieval structure that we see today that became infamous for its blood-stained past. The early years of Bardi Castle were marked by constant warfare and betrayal. It was a fortress that served as a stronghold for various noble families, each one vying for control over the strategic position the castle offered. Blood was spilled on the cold stone floors, and countless lives were lost in brutal battles that left the castle's walls soaked in the terror and violence of its time. But what truly sets Bardi Castle apart from other castles is the chilling legend of the Lady in White. Local folklore tells of a noblewoman, a member of the prominent Rossi family, who met a tragic end within these very walls. Her name was Isabetta, and she was the beloved wife of one of the castle's lords. However, their marriage was far from a happy one. Her husband, a cruel and power-hungry man, was known for his violent temper and his obsession with the family's wealth and influence. One fateful evening, after a particularly heated argument, Isabetta's husband locked her away in one of the castle's towers. Her cries for mercy echoed through the stone walls, but no one could hear her. She was left to starve, her only company the rats and the shadows that danced along the cold, damp walls. As the days passed, she grew weaker, her once beautiful features now gaunt and twisted with hunger and despair. The final days of her life were filled with torment, and on the night she died, it is said that her spirit was forever bound to the castle. Ever since that fateful night, the figure of a woman dressed in a flowing white gown has been seen wandering the castle's halls. Her face is always pale, her eyes hollow with the pain and suffering she endured in her final days. Those who claim to have seen her speak of an overwhelming sense of sorrow and despair that fills the air when she appears. Some say that her ghost still searches for her husband, longing for revenge for the cruelty he inflicted upon her. Others believe that she is trapped, unable to find peace in the afterlife because of the violence and anguish she experienced within these walls. But Isabetta is not the only restless spirit to haunt the castle. Over the years, many visitors to the castle have reported hearing strange noises late at night, footsteps echoing through the darkened halls, the sound of heavy breathing from unseen figures, and soft whispers that seem to come from the shadows. Some have even reported feeling a cold hand on their shoulder, or sensing the presence of something or someone watching them from the darkness. There are certain rooms in the castle that are said to be particularly haunted. The most notorious of these is the dungeon, a cold and damp chamber deep within the castle's foundations. It is said that many prisoners were held in the dungeon during the castle's more violent years, and the suffering they endured has left its mark on the very stone walls. The air in the dungeon is thick with the lingering scent of death, and those who have ventured into this forsaken place often report hearing the faint sound of chains rattling and the soft, tormented moans of the long-dead prisoners. Some claim that they have seen shadows darting across the room, figures that seem to move just out of the corner of their eye, and the feeling of being watched is almost overwhelming. Even the castle's well has a dark reputation. This particular well, located in a secluded courtyard, is said to have been the site of many executions. It was here that the most notorious criminals were thrown to their deaths, their bodies disappearing into the black depths below. The water in the well has always been dark and murky, and many believe that it is cursed. Located in the castle's greenhouse next to the privy gardens, it has been described on. Some say that the souls of those who died in the well are trapped there, their angry spirits rising from the depths to seek vengeance. The well is said to be haunted by the echoes of those who perished, their cries for mercy still reverberating in the stillness of the night. The most terrifying part of the legend surrounding Bardi Castle, however, is not the ghosts that walk its halls or the strange occurrences that have been reported over the years, but the castle's ability to feed on fear. It is said that the castle has a dark, malevolent energy that draws those with weak wills into its grasp. The closer one gets to the heart of the castle, the stronger the sense of dread becomes. Some visitors have reported feeling an intense weight pressing down on them as they enter certain rooms, as if the very walls are alive, watching them with malicious intent. The air grows colder, the shadows darker, and the sense of being watched becomes almost unbearable. As time goes on, the horrors of Bardi Castle only grow more sinister. The legends become more elaborate, the sightings more frequent, and the sense of unease that hangs in the air becomes a permanent fixture of the place. The castle, once a symbol of power and prestige, now stands as a chilling monument to the darkness that has consumed it. Those who dare to venture into its depths are never quite the same when they leave, if they leave at all. For those brave enough to visit, there is a warning. Bardi Castle does not let go easily. Once you enter its gates, you are at the mercy of whatever forces linger within. The spirits that haunt its halls, the malevolent energy that lingers in every shadow, and the very stones that make up the castle's foundation seem to conspire against anyone foolish enough to set foot inside. As the years pass, the legend of Bardi Castle grows, feeding off the fear and the whispers of those who have crossed its threshold. And so, the castle continues to stand, a silent observer of the horrors that unfold within its walls, forever marked by the darkness that dwells within its ancient stones. The first thing any visitor notices when approaching Bardi Castle is the overwhelming sense of silence. Unlike the bustling villages and the sounds of the modern world that surround it, the air around the castle seems still, as if time itself has stopped. The wind is strange here. It blows in unnatural directions, twisting and bending around the stone walls like the breath of something unseen. Locals say that this is no accident, that the very air is alive with the restless energy of the past, and the castle draws all nearby sound into itself, as if feeding off the atmosphere around it. At the heart of the castle stands a grim tower, which has long been avoided by anyone with a sense of self-preservation. It is said that those who have dared to climb its spiraling staircase have never returned the same. Whispers tell of the tower being haunted by something ancient, something that was sealed away long ago by the very family that once ruled the castle, the Rossi family. The tower was originally designed as a place of defense, a vantage point from which they could survey the surrounding land, but over time it became a symbol of isolation and fear. It is here, in this isolated and unwelcoming part of the castle, where the most chilling events began to unfold. It was not the first time that Bardi Castle was stained with blood, but it was perhaps the most notorious. The tragic story of young Luca Rossi, a nobleman of the Ross family, is still recounted by the elders in hushed tones. Luca, unlike his cruel and calculating relatives, was a kind-hearted man who was once adored by the people. However, the Ross family had no place for weakness, and Luca's compassion was seen as a threat. His tragic fate is now etched into the castle's history, a tale of jealousy, betrayal, and the ultimate price of kindness. Luca had fallen in love with a woman from a neighboring village, a beautiful maiden named Isolde. But this love was not meant to be. The Rossi family, in their ruthless pursuit of power, saw Isolde as a distraction, a threat to their control over the land. In a night of violent rage, Luca was bound to the very tower he had once admired. His eyes filled with sorrow as he gazed out upon the lands he would never rule, the woman he would never marry, and the life he would never live. His screams echoed through the empty halls of the castle, but they were ignored by those who had already decided his fate. As dawn broke the following morning, Luca's body was found, lifeless, hanging from the castle's highest tower. The castle walls, once strong and proud, had become a tomb to the broken heart of a man betrayed by the very blood he shared. To this day, it is said that Luca's restless spirit roams the tower, calling out to anyone who will listen. On quiet nights, when the air grows still and the wind dies down, visitors to the castle sometimes report hearing the soft, mournful sounds of a man sobbing. But the cries are not just of sorrow, they are of warning, as if Luca's spirit is trying to warn others of the terrible fate that awaits those who dare to cross the Rossi family. His ghost is described as a shadowy figure, a tall, broad-shouldered man draped in the tattered remnants of noble clothing, his face twisted with anguish. His hands, though translucent, seem to reach for anyone who gets too close, pulling them into a world where light does not exist, where only darkness reigns. But Luca was not the only soul to meet a cruel end within the castle's walls. Beneath the tower lies the castle's dungeon, a dark and suffocating place that has held many prisoners over the centuries. The dungeon is known not only for its inhumane conditions, but for the terror that lingers in its depths. It is a place where the screams of the innocent were once muffled by stone walls, where people vanished without a trace, never to be heard from again. Those who have visited the dungeon claim to feel the oppressive weight of fear, as if the very air is filled with the echoes of countless souls still trapped in the darkness. One particularly haunting tale comes from the days of the Black Plague, when the castle was used to quarantine the sick and dying. In the lower chambers of the dungeon, a large group of villagers was imprisoned, each one infected with the deadly disease. The castle's lords, in their desperation to avoid the plague, locked them away, abandoning them to a slow and agonizing death. Days turned into weeks, and the cries of the infected became more desperate. But no help ever came. The castle's gates remained sealed, the only sound the eerie moaning of the suffering souls trapped within. When the plague finally subsided, the dungeon was opened, but what was found inside was beyond imagination. The bodies of the dead had been piled high, their faces frozen in expressions of pain and terror. Now, on dark and stormy nights, the sounds of suffering can still be heard in the dungeon. The heavy breathing of the sick, the clatter of chains, and the shuffling of restless spirits seeking escape are all said to fill the air. And while the dungeon may no longer house the dying, there are those who have ventured down into its depths and never returned. It is said that the souls of the plague victims still haunt the dungeon, tormenting any who dare to enter. The temperature drops drastically as you descend, the walls closing in around you as though the very castle is trying to suffocate you in its dark embrace. The forest surrounding Bardi Castle holds its own sinister secrets. Stretching far beyond the castle grounds, the woods are a maze of twisted trees and overgrown paths, a place where the light never seems to reach. According to local legend, these woods are cursed, a place where the dead do not rest. It is said that anyone who enters the forest after dark will never return. The trees are said to whisper, and the wind carries faint voices, as if the spirits of the past are trying to communicate with the living. Some claim that the spirits of the Rossi family still roam the woods, seeking vengeance for the betrayals they committed during their reign. Others believe that the forest itself is alive, a malevolent entity that feeds off the fear and despair of those who wander too close. No one knows for certain what lies within the dense foliage, but those who have ventured in speak of feeling watched, as if unseen eyes are following their every step. The sense of unease grows stronger with each passing moment, until it feels as if the very air is charged with something unnatural, something waiting to strike. The curse of Bardi Castle is not merely a legend, it is a reality that has trapped the spirits of the past within its walls. Those who venture too close, who seek to uncover the castle's secrets, are doomed to face the same fate as those who came before them, to become part of the castle's never-ending history of terror. The shadows of Bardi Castle are long and dark, and the whispers of the past will never be silenced. Once you step into its cursed grounds, there is no escape. The history of Bardi Castle is not just one of power and conflict, but of ancient secrets buried deep within the stone walls, secrets so dark that even the most experienced historians dare not uncover them. The castle's foundations have long been a source of intrigue, for it is believed that it was not only built upon the bloodshed of earlier conquests, but also upon the very ruins of an ancient pagan temple, an altar to dark gods whose worshippers had been erased from history by those who feared their power. It is said that the Rossi family, when they first claimed the castle as their home, unknowingly invoked a curse that had been waiting for centuries, buried deep within the earth. The Rossi family's history is one of ambition, greed, and betrayal, traits that seem to run through their veins like blood itself. They were a family that would do anything to secure their power, and their hunger for control over the lands of Bardi Castle and beyond led them to commit unspeakable acts. But it was not the ordinary crimes of murder and treachery that would forever stain their name. It was their descent into something far darker. Rumors circulated among the villagers about strange rituals taking place within the castle walls, ceremonies that took place in the dead of night when the moon hung high in the sky and the stars seemed to fade from view. The Rossi family, it was said, had come into possession of an ancient book, a grimoire of sorts, filled with forbidden knowledge. It is believed that this book held the key to unlocking powers that were better left untouched, powers that would allow them to manipulate the forces of life and death itself. The villagers spoke in hushed tones, warning their children to never venture near the castle, lest they become part of the Rossi family's dark experiments. The first of these experiments was said to be a terrible one. A young girl, only 14 years old, had been chosen to be the sacrificial offering. Her name was Livia, and she had been born into the poor farming class. Her parents had no idea that their daughter had been selected for such a horrific fate. The Rossi family, in their pursuit of immortality and power, needed the blood of an innocent to complete the ritual that would open the gates to the underworld, and Livia was their unwitting victim. On a night that would never be forgotten, Livia was taken to the castle, where she was bound to an altar within the deepest chamber of the castle. The Rossi family gathered around her, performing an incantation in a language no mortal should understand. As the ritual progressed, something terrifying occurred. The earth trembled beneath them, and the candles flickered wildly in the chamber. It is said that the air grew cold, a freezing chill that clung to the bones of those present, as if the castle itself had grown aware of the dark deed being done within its walls. But when the ritual reached its peak, when the Rossi family believed they had succeeded in summoning an entity from the depths of the earth, something went horribly wrong. Instead of the promised power and immortality, they had unwittingly unleashed something far worse, something that had lain dormant for centuries, waiting for the perfect moment to be freed. The castle itself began to shake violently, its very foundations cracking under the strain. The walls of the chamber bled with dark, viscous liquid that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. And then, a voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the halls of Bardi Castle, a voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. It was the voice of the ancient entity, and it demanded blood. More blood. Livia, the innocent sacrifice, was the first to die. But she was not the last. The Rossi family, in their greed and arrogance, had unleashed a curse that would haunt them forever. Each member of the family who had taken part in the ritual was struck down by a force beyond their comprehension. One by one they fell, some to madness, others to death at the hands of an unseen force. But the most chilling part of the story is what happened to those who managed to survive. The Rossi family members who escaped the immediate wrath of the curse were said to have been marked, cursed with a shadow that would follow them for the rest of their lives. It is said that in the years that followed the ritual, the surviving members of the Rossi family were plagued by strange occurrences. Some began to hear whispers in the darkness, voices that spoke in languages they did not recognize. Others reported seeing figures lurking in the shadows, faces that seemed to vanish the moment they were looked at directly. But the most terrifying of all the reports was the story of a child born into the family after the curse had taken hold. This child, known only as the Forgotten One, was said to have been born with no face, a visage that was a blank canvas, devoid of any recognizable features. The child was said to be able to hear the thoughts of those around them, and it was rumored that this child would often speak of the others, who existed just beyond the veil of reality, the ones who watched from the shadows. As the years passed, the Rossi family faded into obscurity, their name becoming little more than a legend told by frightened villagers, but their presence never truly left Bardi Castle. The curse that they had awakened remained entrenched in the very stone of the castle, waiting for the next unlucky soul to come along and awaken it once more. And those who dared to explore the castle's dark hallways often report hearing the sounds of footsteps behind them, though no one is there. Others have seen fleeting glimpses of figures standing just out of reach, their eyes filled with the same torment and madness that once plagued the Rossi family. To this day, the villagers still speak of the horrors that have occurred within the walls of Bardi Castle. The abandoned structure is now a place that few dare to approach, and those who do often report strange feelings of unease. Some claim to have seen the figures of the Rossi family in the windows of the castle, staring out into the night with eyes that are full of sorrow and hatred. Others say that the spirits of the family members who perished in the curse still roam the halls, searching for a way to undo the damage they caused. But the most terrifying part of the legend is the warning that has been passed down through generations that one day someone will awaken the curse of Bardi Castle once again, and when that happens, the castle will be reborn in darkness, its walls will come alive, and the Rossi family will rise once more, this time to claim the souls of those who dared to enter their domain. As the years passed, the Bardi Castle remained abandoned, yet its dark legacy was far from forgotten. In the local villages surrounding the castle, stories of the cursed land were passed down like whispered warnings carried on the wind during long winter nights. It was said that the very soil around the castle was tainted, unable to bear the weight of anything good or pure. Crops refused to grow near the castle grounds, and the nearby streams, once crystal clear, now flowed with water that seemed unnaturally dark, as if the very earth had absorbed the blood and suffering of those who had perished in the castle's depths. Those few brave enough to venture close to the castle were said to experience a strange, unexplainable pull, as though an unseen force was beckoning them closer. Their hearts would race, and an overwhelming feeling of dread would wash over them, the kind of fear that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. The closer they got to the castle, the more intense this fear became, until it felt as if the castle itself were alive, breathing, watching them. There was one such story, a tale that would chill anyone who heard it. It was the account of a young man, an adventurer with a fascination for the occult, who decided to explore Bardi Castle in search of its long-lost secrets. His name was Francesco, and he had heard the tales of the curse, but like so many others, he was undeterred by warnings. He had always sought thrills and adventure, and the dark history of Bardi Castle was too irresistible to ignore. Armed with only a lantern and a journal, he ventured into the heart of the ancient structure. Francesco's journey began innocently enough. He wandered through the castle's decaying halls, marveling at the faded tapestries and the crumbling stone walls, unaware that with each step he was walking deeper into the grip of something far older and far more malevolent than he could have ever imagined. As he moved deeper into the castle, the air grew colder and the silence became oppressive, as if the castle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching out toward him with a presence that made his skin crawl. The deeper Francesco ventured, the more the castle seemed to change. The walls closed in, the passageways grew narrower, and the once grand chambers seemed to stretch endlessly, as though they were alive, shifting and reshaping themselves to trap him. He began to feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him, the sensation of being watched by something, someone that was always just out of sight. Then, one fateful night, as Francesco explored what appeared to be the castle's oldest wing, he stumbled upon a hidden door, half concealed behind a heavy tapestry. The door was cold to the touch, covered in thick layers of dust and cobwebs. But there was something about it that seemed to beckon him, a pull that he could not resist. He opened the door with a creak, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled down into the darkness below. With a sense of unease creeping up his spine, Francesco descended the stairs, the flickering light of his lantern barely enough to illuminate the steps ahead. The air down here was thick with the scent of rot and decay, and the temperature dropped drastically as he made his way deeper into the earth. His footsteps echoed in the silence, and with each step the air seemed to grow heavier, thick with an oppressive weight that made it difficult to breathe. At the bottom of the stairs, Francesco found himself in a large chamber, its walls lined with old, cracked stone. The only source of light was his lantern, which cast eerie, dancing shadows across the room. The chamber was empty, save for a large, circular stone altar at the center. But as Francesco approached the altar, his breath caught in his throat. The stone's surface was stained with dark, dried blood, and the faint, lingering scent of death filled the air. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and Francesco's lantern flickered out. He was plunged into total darkness. His heart pounded in his chest, and the fear he had been suppressing surged to the surface. He fumbled for the matches in his pocket, his hands trembling with panic. When the lantern was finally lit again, he found that he was not alone. A figure stood at the edge of the room, shrouded in darkness. Its face was obscured, but Francesco could feel its gaze, cold and unrelenting. The figure was tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long, as if it had been twisted by the very forces of the earth itself. It took a step forward, its movement slow and deliberate, as though savoring Francesco's fear. With each step the figure took, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier, until Francesco could hardly breathe. The shadows around him began to move, swirling in unnatural patterns, and he could hear whispers, soft, unintelligible words that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was then that he realized the figure wasn't alone. There were others, shadows that flitted in and out of his vision, watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Francesco tried to run, but the room seemed to shift around him, its walls bending and closing in, trapping him in a labyrinth of darkness. He turned to flee, but every direction led him back to the altar. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. until they became a cacophony of voices, all crying out at once. In his desperation, Francesco fell to his knees, his breath ragged and shallow. The figure reached out toward him, its skeletal hand hovering just inches from his face. As it touched him, a chill like ice shot through his body, and his vision blurred. The last thing he saw before his world went black was the twisted smile of the figure, its eyes hollow and empty, filled with an ancient hunger. Francesco's body was found days later, slumped against the altar, his eyes wide open in terror. His journal, which he had kept through his exploration of the castle, was found nearby, its pages filled with frantic scribblings and warnings of the cursed entity that haunted the castle. But by the time the villagers arrived to bury him, the castle had already begun to reclaim him. His body was never found again. To this day, the spirits of those who have ventured into Bardi Castle never truly leave. The curse that was unleashed by the Rossi family's dark ritual continues to plague the land, feeding off the fear and suffering of those who dare to enter its domain. The castle waits, as it always has, for the next victim to enter its depths, to join the ranks of the lost souls who wander the halls of the cursed Bardi Castle for all eternity. As the days passed and the village around Bardi Castle lived in its usual rhythm, the memory of Francesco's disappearance began to fade. However, there were still whispers, carried on the wind, that warned of the cursed castle, and some of the brave souls who dared to venture near the looming fortress. Bardi Castle had not yet revealed all of its secrets, and those who ventured too close always seemed to leave with more than they bargained for. The castle's reputation for death and disappearance had spread far beyond the nearby villages, attracting explorers and thrill-seekers from distant lands, but none of them returned. Some of these adventurers, driven by greed or curiosity, would try to find their way into the heart of the castle's darkest corridors, but not one would ever be heard from again. One of the more notorious disappearances occurred decades after Francesco's ill-fated journey. A group of young, ambitious men from a nearby city decided to challenge the myths and the ghost stories surrounding the castle. They were determined to uncover the truth behind the hauntings and unravel the mysteries buried within its walls. Their names were Luca, Marco, Enrico, and Stefano, each of them full of youthful bravado and too eager to test their courage against what they believed were nothing more than local legends. On the night they arrived at the castle, the moon was high, its pale light casting a ghostly glow on the crumbling towers of Bardi Castle. They stood at the foot of the castle, gazing up at its dark silhouette against the starless sky. To them, it seemed like a challenge, a chance to prove their bravery and to uncover the truth behind the tales of wandering spirits and ancient curses. They began their ascent to the castle's grand entrance, their footsteps muffled by the thick, damp fog that had settled over the ground. The castle seemed to loom larger as they drew closer, its jagged stone walls stretching up toward the sky, swallowing the light and making the shadows seem alive. When they reached the iron-wrought doors of the castle, they creaked open by some unseen force, as if inviting them in. The group stepped inside, their lanterns casting long, flickering shadows along the stone floors. The air inside was cold and musty, filled with the scent of decay. It was as if the castle hadn't seen the light of day in centuries, a place where time had no meaning, and everything was suspended in a world of darkness and dread. The silence inside was suffocating, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. As they ventured deeper into the castle, the sense of foreboding grew stronger. Every room they entered seemed to hold more secrets than the last, and the feeling that they were being watched became more and more intense. But it was when they reached the staircase leading to the lower levels that things began to take a sinister turn. The stairs were narrow, their steps uneven and worn down by centuries of use. As they descended into the bowels of the castle, the air grew heavier, as if it was thick with something unholy. There were no windows here, and the only light came from their lanterns, which flickered and sputtered in the damp air. The further they descended, the more oppressive the darkness became, until it felt like they were walking in a void, with no sense of direction, no way to gauge time. The deeper they went, the more they could feel it. The presence, the weight of something ancient and powerful that was lurking just beyond the reach of their senses. And then it happened. Without warning, one of the lanterns suddenly went out, plunging them into complete darkness. The group panicked, their breaths quickening as they fumbled to relight it. But in the silence, they heard it. The soft sound of footsteps, echoing from somewhere in the shadows. Stefano, the youngest of the group, turned to Marco, his eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Marco nodded, but before he could respond, a low, guttural sound echoed through the darkness. A growl, as though some creature was lurking just beyond the light's reach. Enrico, the most skeptical of the group, laughed nervously, though it was clear he was just as afraid as the others. "It's just the wind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "This place is ancient. It's just settling." But the growl grew louder, more distinct, and the sound of dragging feet followed. The air seemed to press in on them, suffocating, as though the castle itself was alive, feeding on their fear. And then the shadows moved. At first they were nothing more than a flicker, a shift in the darkness that couldn't be explained. But as the group turned toward it, the shadows took form. Shapes that were indistinct and blurry at first, but quickly coalesced into something more terrifying. The figures were tall and gaunt, their eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. The shadows seemed to stretch toward them, reaching out with long, skeletal fingers, their hands frozen in unnatural poses. The group froze in terror as the figures advanced. Stefano screamed, a shrill, piercing cry that echoed off the walls, but before anyone could react, the shadows lunged forward, surrounding them. The air grew colder still, and the sense of dread grew to unbearable levels. The figures loomed over them, their eyes burning with a malevolent hunger. It was as if they were being pulled into a nightmarish trance, a place where reality no longer made sense. The shadows closed in tighter, their whispers growing louder, filling their minds with thoughts of death and torment, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went quiet. The figures disappeared, leaving the group in darkness, their lanterns flickering once more. The silence was deafening, and the sense of foreboding lingered in the air like a thick fog. But the horror was far from over. The group turned to flee, but as they ran, the castle seemed to change around them. The corridors twisted and warped, shifting as if the very walls were alive, contorting in ways that defied logic. The exit seemed to move farther away, and every turn they took brought them deeper into the bowels of the castle. In their panic, they lost track of one another. Marco was the first to vanish, his screams echoing through the halls before falling abruptly silent. Luca and Enrico, desperate to find him, were next to disappear, swallowed by the darkness with no trace left behind. Stefano, terrified and alone, stumbled through the maze-like corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, as the last of his strength waned, he collapsed in a forgotten room, hidden deep within the castle. His last vision before he succumbed to the darkness was the glimmering eyes of the spirits, watching him from the shadows, and the twisted faces of the ghosts that had haunted Bardi Castle for centuries. Days later, the villagers found the castle silent once more. No one dared to enter again. But the tales of those who had disappeared continued to haunt the nearby villages, and the castle stood, looming in the distance, its walls hiding the terror within. Bardi Castle remained cursed, a place of nightmares, its dark legacy growing stronger with each passing year. Those who ventured too close would always disappear into its depths, their stories becoming part of the endless, whispering legends that swirled around its cursed walls.